Hello and welcome to X-Rated X-Men Animated Review Show. Apparently I double-clicked on that button. We are your hosts, Davin and Andre, and with us
Hello.
today is a special Brooks Wachtel, writer, director, producer, magician?
Yes.
Unemployed in a lot of fields.
But a journeyman for sure.
So,
Welcome to the show, Brooks.
thank you. Very nice
well,
to be here.
Andre, why don't
When I get a start on it, you figuring something out?
well, the way we usually do things is, yeah, you start.
Okay. Generally, Brooks, how we generally do these is I usually ask questions about your life, like everything leading up till now, just sort of as we walk through your life, and Davin will intersect with questions related to X-Men or various things like that to the show.
Okay, however you guys want to do it.
Cool. So where did you start? I noticed I read a little bit about you reading up to this, and says you're an Army brat or Navy brat.
Navy brat.
Yes. So your father was in the Navy?
Yep. 21 years naval aviation, specializing in anti-submarine warfare.
Oh, wow. That's incredibly
And,
impressive.
Oh wow.
and just to the showbiz connection, after my folks got out of my dad got out of the Navy, retired, we moved to Los Angeles. When they were done with their other careers, both my mom and dad got into atmosphere work, extra work, and dad got on both the SAG and the afterboards.
No. I'm an actor member as well, so I can relate somewhat. Very cool. So, like, was writing always something like that you were wanting to get to? Like when you were a child, what was it you wanted to? What was the future you saw?
I wanted to be in the entertainment. I always loved movies, always loved television. Like everyone else, wanted to direct, but my career took me into writing, and I always wrote. Even in elementary school, I was writing stories.
Mm-hmm. What kind of stories are you writing?
Oh, fantasy stories, comic book type stories, just about anything. Loved comic books. We moved to, after dad retired, we moved to Los Angeles. And because I went to Hollywood High School, so there you go.
Oh, wow.
And did student films there. And one of the student films I did, I convinced Milt Larson to let us high school kids come in and shoot at the not very long open Magic Castle.
Oh, wow.
And so we shot there one summer. My folks loved the place. They joined as non-magician members. I came in on their number, later learned magic, became a magician member. It's still part of my life. I've performed there. Um, One thing leads to another, intersecting circles. And so
What was Hollywood High School like? That must have been very interesting. Was it just like a lot of people that are either related to or somehow connected to the film industry? Like it would have had to have been, I would assume.
we had a lot of that, and a lot of our students, past, present, and my past, the present, and probably into the future, have done well in the entertainment industry. In fact, several years ago, some of us alumni got together and we did a documentary on the 100-year history of Hollywood High School.
Oh,
And
really?
we did 1,000 copies and gave it to the school, and they use it to raise money for scholarships. And we had a lot of our celebrity alumni in it. Stephanie Powers. Oh God, I'm just drawing a blank. Warren Christopher, former Secretary of State. Nanette Fabre. We had a lot of wonderful people that told of their experiences coming up through Hollywood High School. We were actually going to interview Fay Ray. One of our members was going to New York, and she passed away just before we could get there.
Oh, that's a shame. That would have been amazing. Well, quite an alumnus. So anyway, I'm going to follow up on your writing, but I'll let Davin shoot you with some X-Men questions.
Davin? Okay, well, we're an X-Men show, I guess. Well, you say you were into comics growing up. Mm-hmm. Were you familiar with the X-Men or a fan of the X-Men before you wrote for the X-Men?
Oh, very, very much so. Very much. I love the X-Men, the Claremont Byrne era. Was probably my favorite, and that was by and large the era I think we were referencing a lot on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And
for sure.
things like that. So I very much knew the characters. I wasn't quite the expert on it that some of the other folks were, but I had a very good working knowledge of the characters, the relationships, and how that universe worked, and loved it.
Yeah, there's a lot of
quick follow up on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Of all the episodes we've seen so far in our rewatch, this Dark Phoenix saga seems to be the closest to the actual source material. So I was just wondering how you felt about doing kind of a bit of a pretty close adaptation, really, of a very famous story.
We were having a meeting at Saban where they announced that they were going to be adapting Dark Phoenix. And I think before Eric Lewall, the story editor, got the word, finished the phrase Dark Phoenix, my hand was up and I said, I want to do the climax.
Oh, wow. Good call.
Okay.
It's called shotgun right away.
Yeah, so I just knew that was the story I had to do. Of course, I knew also we'd have to make some big changes, but
I was going to ask about that. Like, was that always was making an alternate ending to that always in the cards, or is that something that came further along the storyline?
Always in the cards. I mean, Jean Grey was going to be a continuing character of the series, so we had to find a way for her to survive, and I think I did. Also, the cast was different. The characters in the series had a slightly different cast than the characters in the comic book. I think I substituted Rogue for a lot of Colossus action. So, there had to be changes made, and also you're dealing with a completely different medium. From trying to adapt it from a comic book into a film. A comic book, you can have an interior monologue, but in film, you're limited to what you see and what you hear.
We absolutely love the ending. If you have to not go the comic route and come up with something different, then the idea of them all giving a little piece of themselves to Savor is genius and really plays in with the themes of the show up to this point, with them working together as a team and the kind of impromptu family they've become.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Your Phoenix episode is actually only the second episode in our rewatch so far that got 10s from both of us. We rank each episode out of 10. And this only the second one after the conclusion of the Days of Future Past. Actually, that one was the first one.
I guess I have a little follow up to go along with that. Like, there are a lot of cameos in that episode and in the series in general, with like the Kree and the Skrull. Was that just something that you were like the sandbox was open to, you could play with what you wanted, or is that just connecting to the original Claremont story itself?
Well, the Kree and the Skrull were in the Claremont story when Lalandra goes to speak with them. That was not only was it in the story, but I think Larry Houston brilliantly directed it, copied the comic book panel. I mean, many times in those classic stories, Larry would go back to the comic and use them in the storyboards to try to have fidelity to the source material. And I certainly worked hard trying to have fidelity to the source material, with the proviso of the different cast, the changes we had to make because of the medium and the different endings and things like that. But I wanted to honor the original story as much as I could. I've done adaptations of various things before, and some you can keep closer to the original material, others you have to make, bigger changes. But I love the story and, wanted to honor Claremont and Byrne's work as much as I could.
Oh, excellent.
Well, before we move on from this Phoenix episode, I think the thing we really, or at least I think we both really appreciate about this show is it was one of the cartoons that was out when we were kids that didn't talk down to us and tried to teach us more adult themes. And I actually think this episode is probably the best example of that we've seen so far, especially the conversation with Beast and Storm about justice. And it's just pretty heavy themes for a kid show, and it was fantastic. It worked really well, I thought.
I don't think any of us ever thought of it as writing a kid show. We were just writing the best show we could. I mean, yes, there are some areas you're not going to be able to get into on a Saturday morning show. sophisticated sexual politics, things like that are not going to be really accepted. But with that proviso, I don't think we never wrote down to the audience. I certainly didn't. I don't think any of the other writers ever did. We simply wrote the best show we could. I always thought of it as like writing for prime time. It just happened to be animated.
And that's probably why this show has been successful as it has been, because the themes that were explored in it are still relevant, sadly, to this day, and also and the things that we saw in them growing up, the fun superhero series, you can appreciate in a different level as an adult.
I didn't work on any of the subsequent X-Men series, so I don't know them well, but I have heard, and I could be mistaken, that for various commercial reasons, they were made less adult. And
they were
as such, never captured quite the feel of the comics that the original series did.
Yeah, no, that is 100% fair.
That's my biggest complaint about those series. They even made them, young teenagers. They wanted to make sort of a high school X-Men sort of show with.
And they always centered around Wolverine. Like almost everything after the series really centers around Wolverine. Like one of them is literally just called Wolverine and the X-Men. So it's like literally like they just put him front and center because he's the cool character that everybody likes. And I don't know if he works his best at the center. He's kind of better on the fringes, I think.
Yeah, he's a fascinating character. He's a lot of fun to write. And I teach a writing class, and one of the things about Wolverine is each word has to count. He's a very few words, so each word has to be well crafted, important, and to the point. But
we've noticed how more pithy he's gotten as the show has gone on. He gets pretty he gets rather downright comical. It's not really comical, but like he's just so he has this sort of dry sense of humor and this fast wit that kind of comes mostly in season 3, which is fun to see. And definitely lengthened the series.
Well, the voice work in X-Men was just terrific. They were wonderful actors. Mind you, I've never met any of them, but I know them through their work.
We've had Lenore on the show, a rogue, Lenore Zan, and
what a great voice.
Yeah, she actually where I live in a small community called Truro in Nova Scotia, and she was our MLA for many years.
Oh.
Yeah, it's like our government representative until recently. So yeah, it's very interesting. Having essentially one of our biggest politicians in the area be someone that I listened to my whole childhood. So it's a very strange dichotomy.
Apparently,
we'll come on our X-Men podcast.
Oh, I'd love to meet her sometime. Apparently, I gave her a line in the Dark Phoenix episode that became very popular.
Oh, I wonder which one that could be. There's a couple good ones actually. Then yeah, I'll have to pick that one out.
I think when Cyclops and Jean want a quiet moment, just my daddy always said, two's company and three's an eavesdrop.
Yeah, that is a really good line. Yeah,
that is a great line.
Yeah, that's one we point out.
I think she might have told us that was her favorite line when she was on the show.
Right, I think you're right.
Well, in that case, I really do hope I get to meet her, because a writer would love to hear things like that.
well, speaking of that, how did you get to writing like in a commercial way, like for television, or where from your high school education did we get to writing for television?
Well, I took courses in the at Valley College and some courses at USC. I wasn't a student. I took like extension type courses. And so in my 20s, I wrote and directed a horror film called Goddess of Death, which not in release, don't look for it.
Sounds great.
A wonderful fate that I went in 1 year from motion picture writer-director to part-time all-night answering service operator. Which is one of those showbiz career adjustments that many of us make. And then I found a job, kind of created a job. I was out on the Venice boardwalk doing a medicine show pitch, selling a smoking pipe. And while I was writing things, trying to get my career going.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an agent, and I'd written a spec script, and she sent it over to Filmation. Now, oddly enough, one of my first jobs out of high school, and this will date me, was working on storyboards very briefly for the Star Trek animated series.
Oh, wow.
I lasted about a week.
I have a Star Trek podcast, so that's very exciting. There's my
Well,
Star Trek
the episode
background
I
over
did voice on was
there.
called Magix 2, I think. It was written by Larry Brody, who I eventually ended up working for on Gargoyles.
Oh, excellent.
Small world.
Oh,
wow.
I didn't realize that because you notice a lot of there's a lot of voice actor crossover between old Star Trek and Gargoyles, especially Next Generation.
Well, Star Trek, the original, I mean, the Star Trek animated series was based on the original series, which had only shortly before gone off the air. And DC Fontana, wonderful woman who became a friend of mine, was the story editor on that show. But anyway, I had an agent, and she sent this spec script over to Filmation. And they were going to be doing, I think they were going to be doing their own version of Pinocchio. This was at the beginning of the VHS era. And I thought that was a really dumb idea.
Why to compete with Disney's version?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's Disney's version, Filmation's version, Mom's looking, which one's you going to buy?
Yeah.
Anyway, I had an interview with a guy named Robbie London, terrific guy, and he liked me and my work so well, he forwarded over to the episodic people. And so I went and interviewed. They were doing Filmation's Ghostbusters, not based on the movie, but based on a series they had done earlier with Larry Storch and they were both in F Troop together. Well, anyway, the name will come to me. Anyway, it was a live action kid show they were doing an animated version of. They had the right, I guess the movie had to get the name Ghostbusters from them. And as a result,
because the original movie
Ghostbusters, their animated series, it couldn't be called just Ghostbusters, had to be called Real Ghostbusters. So I got a job. I was writing with a co-writer. I did that. I did She-Ra. And, I liked writing animation. It was fun. It was fast. It was. Robbie London went over to Deke and told me to go over there, gave my name to story editors. And, I pitched to Dinosaurs and started to meet people. Anyway, basically, I started to get a lot of work in animation.
Oh, excellent.
And I was working on a terrific show called The Legend of Prince Valiant, which was a primetime series.
That has a deep connection to Nova Scotia. The creator of that comic strip that was based on is from this area. Yeah, he's from Nova Scotia.
And this was a primetime adult show. I mean, really like writing little movies. And it was, getting really good reviews. And I had heard the X-Men was being done. And I told my agent, whatever you do, get me on the X-Men. I've got to work on that show.
Was that a hard door to break down?
Well, she came back and said, I had to walk naked in the park, but I got you an interview.
Well, sounds worth it.
Definitely worth it.
I not only interviewed with the story editors, but I had an interview with Sid I Want at Fox Kids to get approval from the network. Both of them became good friends, and I worked with them for years.
Oh, excellent.
So I worked on X-Men, did a script for them, and then I guess the next season maybe they were doing Dark Phoenix, and that was my second script for them, and I just loved it. I mean, wow, this was a dream come true to adopt this story, and I think my script got. What you see on the air is probably 85-90% the way my script was turned in.
So I was curious about that. Like, how does that work if you're in a writer's room like that? If you know what the storyline's coming up, or do you just have to put your name in and say, I want this one, and have to compete with others? Or is it a matter of what the supervisor thinks?
It's not a writer's room in the sense that you think of today, where you break the story in the room. We'd have occasional meetings where they'd go over various stories, and say who wants what and kind of parse them out. But the stories weren't broken. They were just the basic, idea of what they were doing. Or did anyone have any ideas to pitch? And then you'd go and you'd write them yourself and work with the story. Eric and Julia Leewald, or Mark and Mike Edens, who were, story editors, mostly the Leewalds, if I remember correctly. And I worked for them and the Edens on a lot of shows. So that's kind of how it worked. I mean, they were doing a season and Dark Phoenix was going to be part of it. I wanted the climax. The next one I did for them didn't come out that way. It was a script that someone else was going to do, didn't have time, and they asked if I'd like to do it. And that was Jubilee's Fairy Tale Theater.
I was going to ask you about that. If it was your idea to combine sort of the fantasy element with the X-Men, because it had been done before, sort of. There's like this story, Reign of Terror, where they sort of did that. But
Well, it was springboarded, I think, or inspired, though. The stories were completely different by Kitty Pryde's Fairy Tale Theater, which was an issue of the X-Men.
oh, okay.
So they were going to do Jubilee's Fairy Tale Theater. And I think Eric was going to write that one himself, but didn't have time. So he asked if I'd like to write it. I don't think there was any story there yet, just kind of a concept. So I came up with a framing device. I believe I came up with it. This is 20-some years ago, so the details are a little sketchy, but I think I came up with it all. And if not, Eric and Julia will correct me. And one of the things I loved to do was my nephew Spencer was a little kid, big X-Men fan, and he loved telling his friends that his uncle knew the X-Men. And one of the guys said, "Do you really know the X-Men?" And I went, "Yeah, Wolverine doesn't say anything I don't tell him to." I don't think he really understood what I meant, but it impressed him. So I told Spencer I was going to put him in the episode. He was really excited. "Yeah, what powers do I have?" "Well, none. You get to be really smart, though." So Spencer, if you watch that episode, one of the few kids that gets named is Spencer.
Oh,
And that was a big deal for him.
that would be.
That's adorable.
So the kids are in a cave. There's a cave in, they're flooding, and Jubilee has to distract them. So she tells this fairy tale where she gets to be a kick-ass hero. Now, I've always written great kick-ass heroines. And I thought it would be fun if little Jubilee, who basically is the sparkler, gets to be kick-ass.
Yeah.
And then, do fairy tale versions of the other characters and spoof it a bit. Xavier was, Xavier, the all-knowing wizard or whatever it's called. And you use Magneto as the villain and just have fun spoofing the X-Men and spoofing that kind of show. And basically, doing a little parody. But the one thing I got was I could not put the kids in jeopardy. If the cavern was flooding, the kids, you couldn't have one of those scenes where the kids are climbing up the walls and the water is coming up behind. Had to keep it much more safe because you couldn't put kids in jeopardy. So
that was actually funny in the episode. Jubilee would just be like, "Hey kids, let's just go to this other part of the cave." And they're like, "Why?" She's just like, "Yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah,
we're just going to the other part of the cave."
Yeah, because I don't want you're going to all drown like rats.
We often joke about
made it past BS&P. So I found out, I wrote the episode, and Sid later showed me some of the designs for grown-up Jubilee the artist came with, which were these really busty, sexy, kick-ass heroine. And the episode's going, no, tone it down. Didn't have anything to do with that, but love to have seen it. So I just had a lot of fun writing it, and now found out years later it's called the Notorious episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I don't think it's notorious. I think it's a good leadership episode for Jubilee, actually, for like a last season episode. It shows her growth as a character, I think.
Well, one inside joke. The director of that episode, my friend's Frank Scolacci. So if you look at the end, the school district on the name of the school bus is the Scolacci School District.
I did notice that name, and I was wondering if that was a nod to somebody in particular.
That was Frank directing it. But no, I have found out since then that fans either really like that episode or just simply detest it. So,
hey, there's nothing wrong with being controversial, that's for sure.
It didn't.
And
I didn't intend it to be. I just thought it would be a fun little spoof.
Well, the comic fans have a long history of not being able to go too far outside of, to branch too far outside of the existing stuff, much to their detriment sometimes. So I think anytime something's new and exciting is and different and works in the framework is great. So that's a shame that we have some detractors, but I know we're fans. So
Well, I'm
Well, you
glad
meant
you. I had a lot of fun doing it. I mean, sometimes the X-Men scripts would be very angst driven,
Mhm.
you know, and you'd be exhausted after writing it. So this one was more fun. You know?
Yeah, you're true. Like the general theme is always bigotry and prejudice, and it's nice when you get to branch aside of that and write something fun in a show that generally, has a lot of darker subject matter for a children's program. So
Yeah, and I also thought, Jubilee wasn't getting enough credit. She had a good heart. She was gutsy. She
Mhm.
was fun, and it was nice to. I don't know if she ever got much of another episode where she got to be the heroine.
She doesn't that often.
no, not
Usually
really.
she's being saved or
Getting kidnapped. We joke on how
Yeah.
often she gets kidnapped.
She gets kidnapped
Like-
a lot. Yeah.
This one, she beats the crap out of Sabretooth.
Yeah, which is great. That's fantastic. Because in season 1, she was fooled by him and then attacked by him. So it's a nice kind of wraparound towards the end of the series to have her finally get a some comeuppance on him for sure.
Yeah,
Did you give them any art direction for that episode at all? Because you mentioned you work on She-Ra. It really has like a He-Man kind of feel, the animation.
Oh yeah, no, I mean I the descriptions were very colorful, and yes, a lot of direction of what I wanted it to look like. Not that you always get that, but there were a lot of directions of what I wanted to look like. The Cave of the Lost, that kind of thing. Yeah, the forest they're going through, even a little lizard scurrying away, that kind of thing. It was all in the script.
Oh, I never made that She-Ra connection. That's very interesting.
I don't think I did that either, but it was probably subliminal.
Yeah.
But it
you
was
mentioned
all
doing a spoof.
Beauty and the Beast, Princess Bride.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things that went into my own sense of humor. There are a lot of things that went into that episode that, at the time you may not even be aware where they're going. I know the beginning where it's stained glass was a nod to Beauty and the Beast.
Mm-hmm.
Though Beauty
that's right, yeah.
looked a lot better.
Oh, that's
I
very
bet
cool.
they had more money, more time.
Yeah, the change in art style really stands out in that episode for sure.
Yeah, they went with a different studio. And,
yeah.
Again, this is just hearsay, but I heard that studio did some episodes that were so off model that they wouldn't air them till the studio redid them. Now, I that's what I heard. I don't know if it's gossip.
No, that's true. Of the Long Shot episode, we had Eric and Julia Lewald on the show, and Eric was telling us about some of that. Yeah.
There's some stark differences between episodes sometimes, even in season 3, where you can tell. Like we call them the A studio and the B studio because you can tell. You can tell which one is the A and which one is the B pretty quickly when you get into the episode.
Yeah, it was a shame. I would have loved the A studio to have done that episode.
Yeah,
it had the potential for some really phenomenal visuals. Given the money, I mean, Frank is a phenomenal talent and he did a great job. But ultimately, it's what they do overseas that makes it move.
Do you find that frustrating as a writer that like I know like obviously writer director is generally the prima facta because you get to see what your vision in your head is actually come to life the way you want it to. But when you have to leave so much of it up to somebody else to envision when it comes to animation, do you find that incredibly frustrating?
It is rare that what you see on the screen lives up to the absolutely perfect production you saw on the back of your eyelid. The other thing is, when we write it, we see them as real. Remember once asking, or I didn't ask, was telling me he'd been interviewing an old-time radio writer, radio drama, and said, what do you envision when you write it? And he said, well, I'm not seeing 5 guys standing in front of a microphone. You see it as real.
Yeah.
And you see it as flawless. And no production. I don't think anyone ever has an entire production that matches what they visualized when they were writing it and seeing it on the back of their arm. There'll be scenes and certain things that are better, and good actors will breathe life into the dialogue and bring the characters to life in a way that are even better than you envisioned. But on the whole, you see something that's perfect, and reality is never perfect.
That's for sure. You forget how many moving parts are involved with bringing any production to life, especially with animation. But,
Especially television animation, which
yeah,
you know, the money, the time, it's all pretty short, and I'm sure every director on the show, has a mental list of things they wish they could have sent back for redo.
Mhm.
But they probably had it limited to the things that were just totally off kilter. Even in the Fate of Dark Phoenix, at the end, from what I've heard, the animation didn't come back well. So if you look at the end, the spaceship that Lalandra's in does not match the one that's been at the beginning.
You know what? It's funny. I didn't notice that until I think I did, and I made a note of it when we watched the episode, but I forgot to mention it because it's very bug-like earlier on, and then it just seems a little more generic towards the end.
Well, what happened was, if I remember right, and have you had Larry Houston on the show?
No, not yet. We hope to.
He's Davin's white whale. He's hoping to get him someday soon.
Yeah, if I remember, and he can confirm this, they really had to piece together some of the last shots in the ending from different episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So, the ship going into the warp, maybe the window, and bringing in a shot of Alondra. So I think some of that, it matched the script, but the visuals, I think, were pieced together from other things, because I don't think the animation had come back either not complete or not usable. I don't know the story Larry would, but that's the kind of, that's where you depend on the genius of those folks to overcome the deficiencies of meeting an air date and maybe not having the best come back from overseas.
For sure. I'm just looking, just gazing through your filmography as a writer. It's like literally anybody that's in our general age range. Like it's almost every show that shaped our childhood in a sense. Like you got the Super Mario Brothers, DuckTales.
Every show we plan on doing after this one.
Yeah, Iron Man. Even
Gargoyles and Spider-Man.
Even shows that I deeply loved as a kid that not a lot of people either bring up or get references much, like the Mask cartoon. Which I was a big fan of that. Like I grew up in a very small area, so we only had like 2 channels, and one of them, whatever we got in Saturday morning cartoons was it. And between Turtles, Gargoyles, and the Mask, those were like the shows that I would watch all the time.
When I did the Mask, I remember that episode. It had to do with an action hero doing a movie and actually planning a crime.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote it as a spoof of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Mm-hmm.
And the dialogue would incorporate the name of some of his films, as spoofs in the dialogue. And what do they do when they do the voices? They have them sound like Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah, I guess you don't think about that either. You're not in charge of casting the voices. You're just there to make it work. So, yeah,
which really surprised. I was working for 2 story editors, and very good friends, and Bob Skier, the story editor, who was I met him on X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yeah, well, that's what they did with your voice. They didn't get it. I met Bob. Have you had Bob on the show?
No, but another one I hope to have on sometime.
I met Bob on the X-Men because the first thing they wanted me to do was they gave me a villain, which again they decided not to use him, and I'm trying to remember which one it was, but it was a villain I didn't know, and I knew most of the villains. I don't know this guy. They said, well, call the expert, and that was Bob Skier. So I called him up, and we talked for about 5 minutes about the villain, and then for an hour and a half about everything else. And he became a lifelong friend. So I think he helped write the Bible for the show, I believe. Anyway, he'd be another good one for you to interview. So he was one of the story editors on The Mask, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, there'd be these shows, you'd write that were angst-driven and heavy and tough plotting, and you're just truck it out. And then next week you'd be doing Clifford the Big Red Dog.
Yeah, which also was I noticed on your filmography, but just like following that, I mean, obviously working the Spider-Man cartoon as well. You eventually went back to the other version of Ghostbusters for the Extreme Ghostbusters, which is also something I enjoyed a lot as a kid. Also, I was a huge fan of, and when Disney Plus came out, one of the very first things I went back to watch was that Silver Surfer cartoon
Oh,
from '98 because I had such fond memories of it and the animation style and everything. Like it was early CGI and a lot of interesting stuff, but it really felt like otherworldly and very Kirby-esque. It captured the vibe of that extremely well, and I was always a big fan of that.
yeah, they were trying to emulate the look of the comic book, and
Mhm.
that was a fun episode because basically the first half he's put on trial. God, I can remember this stuff.
Mhm.
And two of my favorite movies, they're both Stanley Kramer films. One is Inherit the Wind, and the other is
Excellent.
Judgment at Nuremberg.
Oh, I haven't seen that one. Inherit the Wind is fantastic, though.
Oh, it's funny because the female lead in Inherit the Wind, Donna Anderson, is a very close friend of mine and starred in the movie I wrote and directed.
Oh, wow.
Intersecting Circles, but yeah, you should see Judgment at Nuremberg. An incredible film. Abby Mann's script is just phenomenal. But it was a trial, and so that really appealed to me because you have this, Silver Surfers being put on trial for all the genocides he's caused.
Mhm.
Yet basically he's saying it was to prevent something worse.
Mhm.
And it's an interesting, dichotomy. Now, couldn't go into it as much as I'd like. And sadly, some of this trial stuff was cut. Maybe it was a little too heavy, but it was a fun one to write.
Yeah,
And
no, it's a very interesting. I remember that episode. Very
exactly.
interesting.
And it was I also got to use Gamora, who was the deadliest woman in the universe, though, as the story editor said. I'm not sure why, but it didn't really come into it.
That's incredibly cool. Yeah, like I've always been a big fan of Jim Starlin and what he's done with Silver Surfer and Thanos work and all that sort of stuff. So, like it's we often talk in the show how insane it is now as growing up as a nerd to see all of these massive films that are multi-million-dollar films that contain all these characters we grew up watching. Like if you had told me as a child I'd see a live action movie with Thanos where the Avengers fight him and the Infinity Gauntlet's in it, and eventually we'll get Pip the Troll and we'll see all these other characters. I'm like, you're insane. There's no way that any studio would ever do this. But to be here in the world now, it's crazy and awesome.
Especially since the comic book adaptations, probably prior to the X-Men animated series, had very little fidelity to the source material.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, maybe Wonder Woman, I think the original, not the first one with Kathy Cross, Linda, no, with Cross. God, I can't remember actors' names today, but they did one contemporary with Kathy. God, oh well, sorry, but anyway, the one with Linda Carter, the first pilot to that, actually did reference the '40s comic book story, but outside of that.
Yeah, even like the Hulk TV show, it wasn't like the Bill Bixby one. It was fun and interesting in its own right, but it wasn't like the Hulk wasn't fighting the leader or Thunderbolt Ross. It was a very different show that just kind of skirted what its origin was.
Yeah, even the Wonder Woman
the
show
littlest hobo gets angry.
Never brought in any of Wonder Woman's villains, and the Superman shows, Lois and Clark. They never had the scope and feel of the comic books.
No, I think they're reduced by budget a lot back in the day too. I mean, it's hard to have Brainiac show up and destroy part of the world when they couldn't afford to do that much per episode.
Budget was certainly part of it, but they also just had a different. It's almost like they were embarrassed by the source material.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, especially shows
it took
like
a certain amount of boldness, right? Like to actually go for it.
Also, I think a lot
medium that was sort of looked down upon.
My generation grew up reading comic books. Maybe the guys that were writing those shows, the generation before mine, weren't reading the comics or didn't know the material as well. Because I noticed lots of things that and I use this in my class, that when you're writing a superhero show, and now many of my students probably will, one of the things you have to do is be consistent with the powers, which these older shows were not.
No, yes.
I mean, even actually not just older shows. Remember the first season of Supergirl, which is well after, the rise of these kind of shows. In one issue, in one episode, she's trapped in quicksand, and in the next episode, she's lifting a 1,000,000-ton spaceship into orbit.
Yeah.
In an episode of Lois and Clark, and if I remembered right, and if I don't, but basically they're at a wedding. I think a character's got a gun to someone's head, and you've got Superman there. This is not going to stop Superman, but in the show it does.
Yeah.
And if you know Superman, there's 10 ways he'd stop this guy without even giving away his secret identity.
Yeah.
You had writers.
I think those shows relied heavily on the fact that you didn't have it wasn't on demand. You watched it on TV when it was on TV, and if you missed it, you maybe caught a rerun, but then you never had a DVD series or anything else to go back and watch it.
Well, you did have VHS. I mean,
yeah, that's true. They did, but I don't feel like a lot of those shows were given releases on VHS too often anyway.
No, I mean, you could record them on your.
Oh, yes, that is true. That is true. Yeah.
I mean, the big joke I was going to do on the Powers, and it's probably one you guys have heard before, was in the George Reeves Superman show from the 50s. He'd stand there with his hands on his hips while the crooks fired the guns at him, and the bullets would bounce off, and then they'd throw the gun at him, and he'd duck.
Yeah. I never thought about that before.
That's intentional. It's very hilarious.
Well, George didn't want to get bashed in the head with a prop gun, but
yeah, I suppose so. But I mean, even and I know they have a lot of reverence, but even the Superman films, like the second one, he's throwing his shield and making a cellophane prison and all these things that he never did before or ever did in the comics. That just were relevant for what they need at the time.
The first Superman movie, by and large, I loved. It actually had fidelity to the comic, the first one. The score was phenomenal. The writing was clever. Reeve and the casting, the chemistry. People did object to the re-envisioning of Lex Luthor, but I thought it worked very well for the film. Clever. The only thing I hated, and I found out later this was not the original intention, is when he goes around the world and changes history.
I've never been a fan of that either, because nothing means anything anymore. Why is there any stakes?
Yeah, there's no stakes. You can't defeat a character that can just go back and keep redoing it. And so, that was that. But considering how good everything else was, I didn't. And then, of course, it went downhill from there. They changed directors. I don't think the second film, when they brought in another director, the Shield and all of those new power just didn't make sense. For its mega budget, I was hoping for a bigger battle scene where the Free Kryptonians defeat Earth forces. Basically, it's a small attack, platoon. They beat up and the world surrenders. And I wanted to see, if you remember the 1953 War of the Worlds, the battle scene.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to see something like that. The tanks are firing, the rockets are firing, the jets are coming, and nothing's working.
I want to see a marriage of that, and I want to I feel like, as a comic fan, I feel like things get dark, which is fine, but they don't there's some things that are painted with a dark brush that don't need to be painted. I'd love to see, we got some of that in the Man of Steel, but I feel like that movie is so dark that I'd like to see some of that with some of the fun, bright, happy Superman, or at least hopeful Superman that I know is out there somewhere, and maybe I'll get someday in a movie. But I just feel like I want some marriage of that and the big budget somewhere in between.
You're right. Superman is a character that does not work well dark.
No, and it's they're deep. Batman's popular, so let's just make Superman Batman. It's it doesn't work that way. It shouldn't anyway.
Yeah, one of the things, and I love the Batman films, but the one with Bane,
Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, the one thing that looked a little funny to me is you have the big fight with Bane out in the daytime. And suddenly they look like, WWE wrestlers. Batman just seems to me work best in the shadows.
Agreed.
He's the creature of the night. It doesn't work as well in that context, having him in the daytime. Well, doing the 1960s TV show, it's great.
Mm-hmm.
but that wasn't the atmosphere they were going for.
No, but and it just brings us back to animation, because I feel the best depictions of Batman and Superman, in my opinion, are, and the Justice League, are those of those animations from the 90s. The animated Superman animated series, Batman animated series, and Justice League cartoon, which came a little later, were all incredibly true to character and amazing representations. I still think Mask of the Phantasm is probably the best Batman movie ever made.
Yeah, I agree. I wish I'd worked more on Warner Brothers. I only did a bit of a you see, it's just that time of day when I can't remember names.
Well, Gargoyles was under them, wasn't it? Was that a Warner Brothers show?
No, Gargoyles was Disney.
Oh, right.
But I worked on one Warner Brothers show, and that was it. It's not where the career went.
Yeah.
But I love those characters. I grew up with those characters, and just would love to have written Wonder Woman, because I love, as I said, writing kick-ass heroines, and I'm doing novels now and have a kick-ass heroine in my novel.
Why was that? Why is it that important to you? Is it just you feel like it's a misrepresentation thing, or is it just something that you've always liked reading in fiction yourself?
All of that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one, I think it's more interesting when you have a female, because you've got other things going that you don't have with a traditional male hero.
Agreed. Yeah.
So it's psychologically more interesting. There's more to work with. I see women that way. I mean, some of the strongest, most dynamic and inspirational people I've ever met in my life have been women.
Agreed.
It's more fun. You just get to do more. Right now, my novel, Lady Sherlock, Circle of the Smiling Dead, it's a character I created, kind of a female Sherlock Holmes, did well. The sequel is with my editor.
Oh, awesome.
They're illustrated in the style of the old Sherlock Holmes stories. It's a lot of fun to write, because if I'm writing Sherlock Holmes, or a Sherlock Holmes male character, just solving a mystery. If I'm writing a woman doing it in an extremely chauvinistic era, there's a lot more not only to work with in the world's reaction to her, but the pressures on her that a male character wouldn't have.
And the barriers.
And she can be snarky in a way that is just more humorous because of the comment she's getting. She doesn't suffer fools gladly and come with a comeback.
Well, that totally makes sense as to why you'd be so eager to do, the Dark Phoenix resolution, which focuses heavily on Jean Grey being essentially the most powerful being in the universe. So, yeah, that's fantastic.
And the X-Men, too, is just full of good heroine characters.
And also, one of the classic things in writing is the conflict between what a character wants and what a character needs. And the conflict is usually the collision of those two things. And that is a classic example. They want to save Jean Grey, but they need to destroy the Phoenix. And that is a tremendous conflict. And they eventually realize, in trying to defend Jean, they're on the wrong side.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, and they have to go against someone that they love, to the core of their being. So that's a lot of that. That is the recipe for great drama.
Well, yeah, the other part of that episode that I know we always get back to this episode, but just talking about this theme of powerful women that I thought was very interesting was, oh my God, my brain stopped working. Lilandra, yes, and how she had to. I was going to say Lady Cher, Lilandra, and how she, like there's this whole thing about her duty to her people far exceeds her feelings towards Charles, and at no point is she ever willing to sacrifice her world or her people for Charles or for the X-Men, because they are far more important to her. And I love that, because it like there's real gravity, real weight there, and a real command of being a ruler instead of just a female, which I found was really refreshing, in that she's strong, powerful, and at no point is she ever like, oh, well, maybe I will give up my world for Charles because because I love him. And I love that you didn't go that route. I thought it was fantastic that you held your horses to that.
If I recall, those were things that I brought to it that I don't recall being in the source material. I could be mistaken.
No, I don't think so.
But
Davin's the expert on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
I think I brought that to it because, a woman has to give up perhaps more in a position like that than a man would. So it was something I brought to her because she's in a tremendous conflict between the man she loves and her duty as a queen, as an empress.
And the episode even leaves it on an unfinished note that there's more of that to come, which I really like too. Well, Davin, do you have any more X-Men questions? Because I want to ask him some.
To move to a different episode.
I want to ask him some magic questions, so I want to let you do the X-Men ones.
Okay, well, something that's been bothering me since you mentioned it. What happened with Mojovision, and how was your version different?
It was my first script for the X-Men, and I turned in basically a regular plotted adventure. I don't remember it much anymore, and I think I'm not sure who it was. It might have been Sid said, "Let's go much crazier on this." Which is not what they gave me as my marching orders when I did the first script. So, and there was very little time to redo it. So one of the guys who had done more, I'm not sure who it was, done more X-Men scripts, just did a complete quick revamp on it. And they gave me credit, which I didn't know they were going to. Had I known, I probably would have asked my name to be removed because there wasn't enough of what I wrote left in it for me to claim ownership for it. I thought what they did was terrific. And maybe if I'd gotten those marching orders, I would have come up with something like that. But that's not what they told me they wanted at that point. And it was my first time working with them. So I did something that was more of a regular paced and set X-Men script. I don't remember the details. But
was Mojo character you had a reference
episode really gets meta and starts to poke fun at the producers of the show and everything. That seemed like it was put in after the fact. It even kind of comes off.
I mean, I would have loved to have written something like that, and but one, I'd only just started working with them, and two, that's not what they told me they wanted, and three, if you're going to break the tradition of a show like that, usually you need permission or you need to be so well set up in the show that you feel you can get away with it. And I had just come on board. So I'm forever being complimented for a script I didn't write and just thank people and say, well, it got heavily rewritten and, I don't really claim ownership of it, which I think is when you guys contacted me, you wanted to talk about Mojovision, and I said, it's not really mine.
Oh, fair.
Yeah, we had just gotten on to Mojovision.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great story, a great script. I loved it. I wish I'd written it that way, but I did not.
Yeah, well.
But I had enough fun with the X-Men, to where I didn't regret that so much. I mean, when they first told me it was being rewritten, I said, well, they're going to ever use me again? But they assured me they really liked what I wrote and I'd be back on board. And sure enough, I was. And then, worked throughout the series.
Fantastic.
Well, Andre, since you're going to ask magic questions, can you Andre
disappear? Right we don't need to stop the camera, but I just got something to drink and try and throat.
Absolutely, yeah. Go right ahead.
Oh, sure.
Talk amongst yourselves.
We can, totally.
Oh, yeah. Slanchava, as they say.
Ah, yes. I get it too. What are you drinking tonight?
What are you drinking?
Just pep.
Well, let's do a little promotion here for Cape Breton Brewery, the Breton Brewery.
Yes, I've seen that stuff.
Storm Chaser, vanilla oatmeal stout, pretty good. I'm liking it.
Are you a stout guy generally?
Oh, I like a dark, thick beer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's usually my go-to when I don't have a lot of beer, but stout's usually my go-to. Cheers.
Sonja.
See another question.
World of Gods and Monsters.
That's a great toast. That's one of my favorites.
Or Confusion to the French.
I often say to human misery, which I don't know I like as a toast. I feel like if one thing defines us all as humans and unites us is that we're all miserable at times. So Deb, you another question before we get into my magic questions?
Well, no, you know what? I wanted to ask some magic questions, so you go ahead. I just want to know,
Okay, well, I
like,
just had two
one
quick
question I
questions.
have about the Magic Castle. Like, how do you get in as a magician? Do you have to like prove your prowess to other magicians?
Yes, and until very
And, like,
recently, I was on the committee that would watch the auditions and decide whether they were of the right caliber for membership.
Oh wow,
wow.
that'd be a hell of an honor, and also, you know, you have a lot of young magicians' lives in your hands.
You do not have to be a magician to join the Magic Castle.
Just a fan in general of magic.
You can join as an associate member.
Ah,
It's more expensive, but you have almost all the same privileges as the magician members, except for being able to go or utilize things where magic is exposed. But other than that, same privileges.
oh, excellent! Wow. So, what was magic something you were always a big fan of? Like, were you growing? You mentioned your folks kind of fell into it and were members, auxiliary or not auxiliary, but members as not magicians. But was it just being around it that drew you into it?
It was being around it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved it, and I was in on their number. I was an associate member, and I said, you know, I'd like to learn this. So I'm a graphic artist, and there was a magician who did stained glass windows. And so I made a deal with him. I said, I'll design some windows for you, and you can teach me magic. And he did. And I did. And then I took the test. I passed. I switched over from a associate member to a magician member. And a few years later, my wonderful now writer, Alina Poussette, who also was a magician member, and I performed in the main theater there, opening for the Pendragons, who were one of the biggest illusion acts around.
Oh wow!
Maybe I should say they closed for us.
Yeah. Well, that unites us too. I'm a graphic designer as well. That's my day job. So out here on the coast, but no, that's very cool. I've always had a fascination and a love of magic in general. So it's really cool whenever I meet people. I have a friend that does it out here. A lot of shows, you know, corporate and children's and stuff. But when we went to Vegas, he had a lot of friends that had shows there at the time that he had met through magic circles. So I got to meet a few of them, and it was a very rewarding and fun experience.
Yes, I've got some friends still in. I mean, not as many as I used to, but it used to be a real mecca for magicians. But the last time I was in Las Vegas, I hooked up with some magician friends.
Yeah, there seem to be quite a few. Like there's Mac Davis. We got to watch his show, and I was really impressed seeing it live. This was a long time ago now, probably about 10 years ago. But between him and Dave, one of his friends was a dancer for one of the guys that had like a lot of tigers in his act, like white tigers. I want to say it's Rick something. I can't think of his name, but we got to go to one of those shows too, which is really fun.
Well, Siegfried and Roy had the tigers.
It wasn't them. I would have remembered them for sure, but it was I can't remember. His name was Rick something, and he has like a white tiger rescue or you know. So he had a bunch of them in his act, and afterwards we got to kind of go backstage and see a few of them, you know, in their cages before they went back to the reserve, and it's impressive. I've always been a fan of cats, so it's impressive being that close to scarily large white tigers.
Well, magic is fun. I really like it, and incorporated some of it into my work. There's a scene in Lady Sherlock where there's a card game going on, and Lady Sherlock recognizes the other person's cheating by using a magic sleight.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, you just made another sale of that, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. When I was waiting, I just had added to my Amazon cart. That looks really interesting. I'm definitely going to read that.
Please, if you like it, or even if you don't, review it, because the more reviews, the more.
Oh, I'll happily share it, and we'll definitely do it on our social media for this as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely.
The sequel should be even. All of the novels are springboarded from real history.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, you know, because I did a lot of history. I did a lot of shows for the History Channel.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. You did quite a few documentaries in there for the History Channel too, which is very interesting.
Probably the biggest thing I did for them, I co-created and co-exec produced a very popular series called Dogfights.
Yeah, I saw that. I want to ask you about that as well. So is that just
like a World War I or thing?
All aviation, from World War I to almost to the present. It was a concept to show you how I can never get away from animation.
Yeah, they recreate them.
We would interview the aviators and bring their combat to life using CGI. And Cynthia Harrison, who I also wrote a lot of animation with and other documentaries, and Jason McKinley was an animator. We pitched the series to a company. They got it going, and we were on for about 2.5, 3 years until the History Channel sort of changed formats to not have much history.
Yeah, I was going to say shows about Bigfoot, nothing that actually has to do with history.
However, thanks to that, the one place on earth I'm a rock star is probably the Palm Springs Air Museum.
Oh, excellent.
I actually did a lecture there on the history of dogfights, which is still a show extremely popular in the aviation community.
Were you like always a fan of like aerial combat or planes in general, or is this just something
Well,
that
okay,
came?
my father was a career naval
Of
aviator.
course, right? Yes.
So I grew up around aviation, ships, military. I actually knew ships better than aircraft, but I had a good knowledge of both.
Wow,
And
that's super cool.
my first documentaries were episodes of The Great Ships, which an animation friend of mine, Rich Mueller, who I worked for on a show, was also working on. He's a history nut. Gay got me an interview, and that started me working in documentaries, and I've done a lot of documentaries.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It's interesting because in fiction, you have to make stuff up, and in documentaries, that's discouraged.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we don't want to take
Definitely
off
a different job.
your time tonight, Brooks. I had one more question, but Davin, do you have anything else you'd like to bring out?
Really, I'm at your
Oh,
disposal.
sure.
Ask the
Okay,
question.
well,
We'll see where it leads.
sure. Well, okay, I'll ask mine then,
Um,
and while Devin's preparing. So I noticed looking at your animation credits that there's one that has the most by far over the others, and that would be RoboCop Alpha Commando.
That is a mistake.
Oh, is it? Okay.
That's an Internet Movie Database mistake. They've given that to every writer. Part of it was because that show, much to my chagrin, did not give individual writers credits on each episode. They had a gang,
Oh, really?
which I thought was despicable, despite the
Yeah.
fact that some people I admire who probably had nothing to do with the decision were working on it. But because it was a gang credit, I think I did 3 of them. They
Okay.
gave
Wow.
everybody, all the writers on it, full credit. It's really one of the things. I was for more than 20 years on the steering committee of the Writers Guild of America Animation Writers Caucus, trying to make life better for animation writers. I mean, this gets into the technical stuff, but most animation is not covered by the Writers Guild.
No, this is very interesting. Actually, I like this sort of stuff. So I did not know
Yeah,
that.
me too.
Okay, most animation is not covered by the Writers Guild. Some primetime stuff like The Simpsons, Futurama is. That's a story in itself. Some of the streaming stuff is, and occasionally some daytime stuff is, of which I've worked on, but most isn't. And it's because of a number of reasons, one of which is when Hollywood was unionizing back in the 40s, cartoons weren't so much written as gagged out storyboard guide. They were 7-minute theatricals. So they were excluded from the Screenwriters Guild, which became the Writers Guild of America. Starting in the 60s with shows like The Flintstones, which were basically an animated sitcom, they couldn't write them fast enough that way, so they started writing scripts. And these scripts were then under what was Local 839, now called the Animation Guild. That is a below-the-line union that mostly handles artists. Do you guys know the difference between above the line and below the line in show business? Above the line are the talent guilds like SAG-AFTRA, DG, Directors Guild, Writers Guild, where you negotiate the price. I mean, there's minimums, but you negotiate it. Below the line are the things that are set costs.
Okay.
And they are mostly the IA unions, the carpenters, the grips, though they're every bit as important as writers and directors, the editors, the cinematographers, the electricians, the grips.
The background fall into that too, like
You mean background players?
yes.
Those are either non-union or under. They were under the Screen Extras Guild. They're now under SAG-AFTRA.
Okay.
I mean, SAG and AFTRA were 2 unions that combined. Anyway, because of this, the writing was not under the WGA. So there's no residuals, no credit arbitration. In other words, if they take your name off it, you can't do much about it. No secondary use. Meaning, if I create a character that gets used in other episodes, I don't get any money for it.
Oh, wow.
No guarantees to have your name on any of the publicity or box art. All of the things that live action writers get.
Wow.
So we're trying, we're trying to fight that. And part of the problem with moving the writers from the Animation Guild or 839 to the WGA is, and this goes into heavy labor law, is they were already at another union, and trying to cut out a part of another union and move it over to another, craft severance it's called, is extremely difficult.
Wow. That's very interesting.
Studios like Disney fight tooth and nail to make sure it doesn't happen, because they don't want to have to pay on, say, their animated features and their shows what they'd have to pay if it was under the Writers Guild.
Wow.
So there is a huge difference, and the pay scales themselves are vastly different.
Wow.
For instance, I worked on Young Hercules, a live-action WGA show.
I was going to mention that, but I felt like I'd ask you a lot about your shows. I watched that show as well. So
okay, they're both 22 minutes. And the reason, by the way, they came to write a lot, the Lee Walls were story editing that show, so they used a lot of the writers they knew. But also one of the reasons was half-hour drama had largely disappeared from television. The only group of writers that really knew still how to do it were us in animation. But I made more on that one Young Hercules episode than I probably did in 3 or 4 or more animated episodes, and I still get a little money from it. And it was easier. It was easier because in animation you stage more. And in those days you even wrote a lot of camera angles. An animation script is far denser and far more pages than an equivalent live action script. It's a lot more work.
Interesting.
Which is a great exercise for screenwriters, because you really have to visualize. You can't just write a play and put in a couple of camera angles. You have to write visually.
Wow, I didn't realize that it was that political when it came to the writing circuit. That's crazy.
These are probably not things that get covered, and I don't mean to denigrate, but a fan blog,
No, not normally, but it is public. But there's been a lot of animators and like studios that, not even just with animation, there's also like graphic, like CGI animators and stuff that also it's come out how little they are paid in relation to how big some of these movies, that especially Disney movies like the Avengers movies and those sort of things.
And by fan blog, I didn't mean anything derogatory. I think it's great what you guys do.
Oh, sure. No, it's all right.
And believe me, we're all fans who'd like a blog of one thing or another.
Oh yeah, no, we'll happily take that.
Fan blog on something.
Oh
else.
yeah.
Well, you do. Yeah, I mean, you make the ultimate fan blog when you do a show about like dog fights or that sort of thing. Like you're literally just doing this, but on a much grander scale, which is lovely, and it reaches a much bigger audience.
Well, and I got paid for it, which helped.
Yeah, that helps too. Yeah.
On the other hand, I had really tight deadlines. Dogfight started. I mean, if you want the quick story,
sure.
We did a 2-hour special, and they ran it, and the ratings went through the roof. And they ran it again; the ratings were even higher. So the History Channel decided, this is a series. Let's do a series. And even getting that 2-hour special was difficult because they'd never done anything with that much CGI. So first we did a 20-minute test. I mean, it was, and one guy, Jason McKinley, was doing all the CGI just for the 2-hour special. He put together a team for this. So anyway, they okayed the series, but they didn't give us much lead time. They weren't conversant in how long animation can take. And we had a really good network exec, but wasn't conversant in animation to know how expensive it is when you want to make a change. And network execs, that was a learning curve for them, anyone that didn't have an animation background. I mean, like, if you're doing a show like the X-Men and suddenly an exec wants a change down the line, it takes, 6 months to animate it. And when you start making changes late in the game, if they do, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And a lot of time.
Well, there were episodes of the X-Men series that came out seasons after they were supposed to, because they would send it back. And like in this book here by the Lee Walds, art and making of the animated series gets into that, and how like the studio be like, no, you can't send it back. It's like it's too expensive, and they're like, no, we have to send it back. And like the big arguments they'd have there.
And so the History Channel didn't have a background. The exec didn't have a background in animation, but he learned pretty quick and got pretty smart about it.
Yeah, it's amazing how many angles they'll work once they know what the angles are, right?
Well, I mean, we interviewed the pilots, and we did a couple of ship shows too. I got to go to England and interview people that were involved in the hunt for the Bismarck.
Oh, wow.
And I should also point out, when we made that show, we were the very tail end of when you could get World War II veterans. They were falling off left and right. So when the History Channel decided not to do history, I was saying, when they come back to wanting to do history, these people are all going to be gone.
Yeah, I hope that that day is sooner than later, because the sensationalist everything's got the sensationalist bend to it.
What do you think about that? Like the History Channel was a great history channel there for a while, and it's just kind of sad.
Well, it's like anything. They have a board of executives that want to get ratings because they want to sell ad space. So they need eyes on it, so they got to make weird, provocative stuff they think people are going to like. And unfortunately, 8 seasons of a bunch of idiots in the woods trying to find Bigfoot is apparently more important than learning about history. So,
while we were on the air, they changed execs, and Ice Road Truckers premiered.
Oh, yeah.
Ice Road Truckers cost a fraction of what we cost to make and got double the ratings. And more importantly, it got ratings in the younger demographic they were always after.
Yeah.
So the handwriting was on the wall. Plus, the network had made what I felt were some mistakes in our show. The earlier episodes had more context, more lives of the pilot, more setting up what the combat meant. They wanted it more like a video game, which some of the later episodes, had less context, which I felt was a mistake. So, I mean, whatever goes into the hit or miss or popularity or rise and fall of a show is usually a complex series of things. We had 11 episodes or 11 or 12 episodes, 11 episodes, I'm sorry, and a 2-hour pilot, which counted as 2 episodes for the first season. And when we were put on a night of military shows, the others tanked. We were the only hit. So the History Channel ran those 11 episodes into the ground. And naturally, the ratings started to slip. You have no control over that. Mm-hmm. But those are just some of the things that can kill a show, affect a show that the creators have no control over. You just do the best work you can. And the same with animation. Some of the shows I've worked on that I'm proudest died because they were put on in syndication maybe at 6:30 in the morning somewhere.
What would some of those shows be like? Well, if you could guess, what would be your proudest work that you've achieved in animation as a writer?
I think my favorites would be The Legend of Prince Valiant and X-Men. I mean, there were others really that I loved too, but maybe those were the two I enjoyed the most. Prince Valiant was really adult themes. Like I said, it was serialized. The conclusion of Prince, not serialized in the way a show is today, but they were connected. And in the final episode, I tied up events that I'd started with my first sale to them 2.5 years before.
Oh, beautiful.
And they had, it was like doing a little movie, a 22-minute movie, but it was you had adult themes, adult characters. They were layered characters. The X-Men as well. But Spider-Man was a lot of fun. The superhero shows that I grew up with, they were all a lot of fun. Writing Clifford the Big Red Dog. I mean, you think writing a kid's show is simple. It's deceptively hard to write that simple. Mm-hmm. Other shows where I just got to be funny and, have a ball and just write real, all the gags. Extreme Ghostbusters was a lot of fun to write. And sometimes it's the people you're working with. Exo Squad was one I adored. It played right into my history military background and worked with great people. Plus, they gave you the stories. They gave you kind of a little outline. I did one in like 3 days and then held it for a few days so they wouldn't think I did it that fast.
Was that Will Mineo on Exo Squad? Did he do
He worked on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was working with not only the Leewalds, but Mark and Mike Edens.
Oh yes, yeah, they wrote a lot of episodes of the show of the X-Men.
The Edens and the Leewalds had a company together. Storyboard shows for a while, and they were a terrific team. So yeah, just I've been lucky. I didn't get pigeonholed. I got to write in all kinds of genres. I did preschool, I did comedy, I did adventure comedy. Tuttenstein, which I won the Emmy for, was a lot of fun. And I worked hard action, adventure, drama, then live action, documentaries, some minor feature stuff. And
you got to direct a feature film too.
Yeah, which I hope someday to clean up and get out there. But anyway, by the time I decided to retire, and then I still do occasional scripts for friends.
Mm-hmm.
I just did one with Lena Poussette for Bob Skier. We did a show for a Chinese. It was a lot of fun. We did a few episodes. And it was Lena's first animation. She was terrific.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
I mean, is there a secret to not getting pigeonholed in that industry?
I don't know. I just didn't. I worked on a lot of stuff, and I got recommended for a lot of stuff. And sometimes it was the people you know. I mean, a story editor that I loved who passed away, Dean Steffen, I met him through the Leewalds. They recommended me. And, he did all kinds of shows and would just hire me. So, and he'd recommend, that you get recommended to other people. Your agent will recommend you. And with Cynthia, we did Spider-Man and Clifford and other shows. My first two were with this She-Ra and Ghostbusters with a guy named Tom Bagan, and a ton of solo work. And then, just it was a lot of fun, and it was it was several between 3 and 4 decades.
Oh.
And so now I like writing novels because I have a brilliant editor whose notes I respect, and I don't have to take a lot of notes because as a TV writer, my agent's husband, who is a old-time, TV writer, wrote Combat and great shows, had to say, the first draft belongs to the writer. After that, your job is to save the script.
That is incredibly true. I imagine once the studio gets through with it, it is the Frankenstein monster, what you initially had created. So,
and I teach since 2005. I've taught a writing course at UCLA Extension.
Oh wow!
Or as I like to say, discouraging eager young minds from being my competition.
You got to start discouraging them young.
That's right. You got to really put that doubt in there early.
Actually, I'm proud of them. Several of them are now working very well in the industry.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, it's nice that you could pass on the knowledge and help shape, the people that'll be making the X-Men of tomorrow, hopefully. So,
well, speaking of the X-Men of tomorrow, isn't it great that the show we did is so popular? They're trying to bring it back.
Well, it is. It's coming back.
It's coming back
with the Leewald and Larry Houston as consultants.
Yeah.
Not one of the writers who inspired them to make the show so great asked to come back on it.
Really?
That's the nature of our business.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, but I think I was sadly felt like I knew the answer, that you guys probably weren't asked as well to come back, any of the writers.
No,
no, I think Bo DeMaio wrote basically all of it himself, I think.
Oh, really?
I think so.
Well, I mean,
and I trust with the Leewalds and Larry as consultants, it will do honor to our original show. And we must
the voice cast.
And the voice cast, yes. We must have done something right, because 25 plus years later, here I am talking about it.
Yeah, well, we're massive fans, and we can't thank you enough for joining us here tonight, Brooks. This has been awesome. It's been a real honor and a pleasure.
Well, I had a great time. I hope I answered your questions.
Oh no, this is fantastic. This is exactly what we love to do, is just have a nice, fun conversation. Yeah, I've learned a lot, actually. I didn't realize stuff about the writing industry and how political that is, and how I knew there's rumblings of certain things, even in connections to like the people that created the comic book characters not owing anything to Disney, for these movies. Like, I think Jim Starlin said he got more money playing a background, like he had a little small part in the background somewhere than he got
it's
from
like in a Fantastic Four movie.
Yeah, then he got from actually creating Thanos or any of these other characters that were huge parts of the movie. So
the only residual I've ever received I mean, we do get occasional foreign royalties, but
Mhm.
but the only actual residual I've ever received in animation was for doing a voice on Prince Valiant.
Oh wow, just the voice.
Wow.
Well, that's amazing. It's sad, sadly, but hopefully, your work and your continued work in trying to change those sort of things will bear some fruit.
Yeah.
Maybe
Can
they
I get a
will.
Yeah,
plug for my novel?
Absolutely, plug away.
definitely.
I am
100%.
It's on sale in a lot of places, but probably the easiest is Amazon. And there's a lot of different Lady Sherlock franchises, but the novel is called Lady Sherlock, Circle of the Smiling Dead, illustrated in the style of the Sherlock Holmes films by Brooks Wachtel, and deals with real history, has a fun character, and hopefully you'll like it.
Yeah, we'll post it on our social media. If I just searched Lady Sherlock Brooks and it came up right away. So yeah, it's easy to find. Make sure you check it out. It looks really fun, and I'm very excited to read it. So
Yeah, me too. You got 2 new readers here for sure. And, all our ex-goons, as we call them, I'm sure a lot of them will pick it up as well.
absolutely.
Okay. I was an X-Men fan before I was an X-Men writer.
Well, that's why the show.
Do you have
is
a
so
favorite
good.
X-Men character?
Boy, oh boy, I think everyone's favorite is Wolverine, but I
Yeah,
love them all. I love them all. Rogue is so much fun. They're
hey, you got to go with the Canadian. I mean, come on.
Well, I got a mask right behind me.
Yeah, Canadian's always a good bet for us East Coast Canadians. So
yeah. I just and again the Claremont Byrne era, was just magic for me.
yeah, it's still hard to touch. I don't know if any modern writers ever come nearly as fun close to that.
I think the problem I
It
had
holds up so well.
when Marvel started having so many multiple titles, and that you had to, buy 5 books to follow a continuity, is when I started to drop out.
Yeah, it's I still hold on because I've always been a massive Spider-Man fan. Still am, but I still hold on for Spider-Man mostly for that sort of stuff. But I've dropped off from almost everything else because of that. It's really hard to, I'll buy the occasional trade that'll fill me in on some of the stuff that's going on, but the days of blindly buying all the stuff that just interests you, it's too hard to keep track now.
And Spider-Man was another great show to work on. Their stories from that, but.
Well, we're hoping.
Are you going to dish dirt about John Semper Jr. as well? Rick Hoberg came on the show and he said he has all the talking out of school about John Semper Jr.
I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to do that. Just John is a friend of mine. I'm not. So no dirt to dish.
Well, we're hoping when this series wraps, we're probably going to go.
I want to say it's fun you mentioned Rick Hoberg because he has done illustrations for the next Lady Sherlock novel. He's a friend and a phenomenal illustrator. And just
he's a fantastic artist.
Terrific artist, terrific person. And I can't say enough good things about Rick Hoberg.
So when is the second one coming out? Do you have a date? You said with your editor now, but do you have a projected date on when it'll be out?
No, I don't. My editor is very, very busy, and for various reasons, it's backburnered.
I see.
And so when it's, when she finishes, and I'll get it out.
Well, we look forward to reading it. That's for sure.
Thank you very much.
I'm promoting it.
Yes. Well, thanks so much, Brooks. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and we can't thank you enough for being on the show.
My pleasure. Take care. Nice meeting both of you.
You too. Thank you.
LA. I'll give you a guess. Magic Castle.
Oh, the first. Well, I'll be messaging you the second I'm in LA.
Take care, guys.
Yep, me too. I see it. Thanks. And this here with a little 1, 2, 3.